Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to RIA's Environmental Sustainability Group meeting, our fifth of five roundtables with Network Rail looking at environmental sustainability. And before I will hand over to our speaker, I will introduce myself and just give you a bit of a quick update. So my name is Milda Manomaitita. I'm the Innovation Director at the Railway Industry Association, and we hopefully we'll see a lot of you this week on Thursday, well, actually tomorrow at our annual conference in London. But if not, we have some other events coming along that might be of interest to you. Ooh, there we go. So the next one is in December in Birmingham, 7th of December. We're running an Unlocking Innovation Intelligent Railways event. This is this last of the series this year as well, looking at digital and data issues. Then we are opening our entries to Rail Industry Supply Excellence Awards, and you are now able to submit an entry. So this is our annual, it will take place at our annual dinner. It's a big celebration to celebrate your success. And these are the categories that you can enter. And for those of you joining the group, I'm guessing Environmental Social Governance Award might be of interest, but please go to the website and have a look. We are also opening the registration on our innovation conference that is taking place next year, 28th and 29th of March in Nottingham. And I am biased all about innovation events here because I'm the innovation director. So there you go. But I am planning a lot of interesting activities, very interactive sort of gatherings during the event. So please do have a look, register. There's opportunities for you to engage. Right, so back to today. As I mentioned, this is our fifth of five roundtables with Network Rail. And thank you, Denzel Collins, for joining us. We had a change of speakers the last minute because of all of the changes that are happening around us. So Denzel is the Energy and Carbon Strategy Manager at Network Rail, and he will take you through the decarbonization aspect of Network Rail's sustainability strategy. We, as today, we have recorded all previous roundtables, and you can access those on our YouTube channel. So I've added a little QR code here. You can scan it now, but what we will do, we'll also send a link to this recording and the previous recordings to all of those who registered next week. It will be in Tech Talk, and it will be also sent to you personally. So that's great news. Right, and now, before I keep I need to stop talking. So Denzel, it's over to you. And what we're going to do now, Denzel is going to do a bit of a presentation, and then we'll take questions afterwards. Over to you.
Thank you, Milda, and good afternoon, everyone. I will just share my screen and bring up my slides. Just bear with me a moment. Okay, good. So thanks again, Milda, for this opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity to present the work that we're doing in Network Rail around low emissions and the strategy going forward to 2050. So my name is Denzel Collins. I am the Energy and Carbon Strategy Manager for Network Rail. I wear another hat, which is also called the Low Emission Strategy Lead, and that is to oversee Network Rail's decarbonisation plans when it comes to Scope 1, which is all about our emissions that we burn within vehicles and buildings, Scope 2 and Scope 3, which I'll go into a bit more detail in just a moment. But essentially, I sit within the technical authority, which is a national directorate within Network Rail, and it provides support, guidance, expertise from a technical point of view to the regions, the routes, and the functions on all things, not just environment and sustainability, but also engineering, other aspects of the business and the operations thereof. But today's the focus of it is low emissions. And within the low emissions aspect of Network Rail, we actually sit underneath the environmental sustainability strategy, which was published in October 2020. And that's consists of four key pillars. The one that we will be discussing today and which I'll be presenting is the low emissions railway. There's another pillar which is all about being resilient to climate change. a third pillar, which is all about improving biodiversity, and the fourth is all about sort of minimizing waste and recovering and improving circular economy. So there's four key pillars within the environmental sustainability strategy, and today we'll be focusing on the low emission railway aspect. I should also point out my colleague Liz Holford, who's been on the call previously, is our social value lead, and she also is in charge and sort of looks after the social value framework, which sits and underpins all of the strategic pillars that we have. And we've got other colleagues within the business that look after the enablers activity, the systems and capability around how we bring it all together so it's much more palatable for the business to adopt and implement a variety of sustainability themes. But today's focus, again, as I mentioned, is the low emission strategy. And here is not a full exhaustive list of our milestones, but I thought these are the milestones that I would bring to everyone's attention on the call. Purely because it's quite clear that we are focusing on reducing scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And many of you on the call would know what those mean, but I will run down a quick definition of each of those so we have a bit of an understanding as to why and our plans going forward in terms of addressing and tackling those various scopes of emissions. So scope 1 is all about our emissions that are associated with burning our burning fuel within our vehicles or within our company buildings that we own. Scope 2 is the emissions that are associated with purchasing electricity, but also they could also include steam, heat, cooling, for example. And scope 3 is the emissions that are associated with our value chain. And within this particular slide, you can see that we are doing a number of key activities to address each of those key scopes. The first is about how we transition our cars and vans from relying on diesel and petrol through conventional internal combustion engine technology to zero emission vehicles, which includes sort of battery electric vehicles, but also hydrogen vehicles as well. And we've got a number of targets that surround that. We've got the target to reduce or transition 25% of our cars to ultra low emission vehicles by the end of this year. We've also got a target to transition 100% of our cars and vans to zero emission vehicles by 2027. And a final target to transition our entire fleet, which includes our HGVs, our heavy good vehicles, to 100% zero emission vehicles by 2035. So that's our scope 1 category. And we're also looking at how we transition away from natural gas, which is our 2029 milestone within the low emissions pillar of our environmental sustainability strategy. There's other milestones to note. We've got actually within our business 2 specific targets for the end of this control period, which is about how we reduce our energy use by 18% and our carbon emissions by 25%. By the end of March 2024. We're doing a lot in that space in terms of implementing energy efficiencies, looking at ways to decarbonise our electricity through power purchase agreements, which I'll go into a bit more detail, and other particular means, especially when it comes to looking at or enabling the regions and the routes to procure traditional energy efficiency suppliers so that they can install and maintain those assets. And then scope 3 is another key aspect of our strategy. And I'll give some updates in terms of what we're doing in that space and the targets that sit above those. So firstly, going into reducing our scope 1 emissions, as I mentioned, we have a milestone to reduce our scope 1 emissions by swapping out our entire fleet to zero emission vehicles by 2035, as well as transitioning away from natural gas. I thought to bring up this particular graph to show our trajectory towards that target. So as I mentioned, our target is to have 25% of our car fleet to be ultra low emission vehicles, and we're making very good progress in that space. We expect to exceed that target, not only because we are on track to meet that from a ultra low emission vehicles perspective, but we've also ordered in some zero emission vehicles as well, and specifically zero emission vehicle cars as to meet that target. And some enabling activities that have occurred over the last year or so is that we've been able to install over 450 electric vehicle charging points across our managed stations, which include Reading, Manchester Piccadilly, Welwyn Garden City, and many others. so that we're enabling not only our fleet but the public to utilise these charging points. And we're doing some further work in that space to install over 100 charging points across our Tockley stations, but also within depots and other railway environments. I think what's quite key to note is that we've recently set up a national transformation program, and that is to facilitate and drive that delivery of zero emission vehicles being integrated into our fleet operations, but also to deliver and implement charging infrastructure where we're looking at from slow to rapid chargers to support with our vehicle operations and other enabling activities such as setting policies and standards to enable the business to transition to zero emission vehicles. And just to note some of the things that we're doing around transition away from natural gas, as our business has evolved, regions are progressing with their energy efficiency plans, which include looking at air source heat pumps, for example, where we actually won a Salix grant for a site in Scotland. And they're progressing with looking at air source heat pumps going in there to replace their gas boilers. And there's many other initiatives that we're doing within that space across the regions in terms of transitioning away from gas boilers to electric or low carbon technologies. So what's next? So as I mentioned, that we are looking at further installing electric vehicle charge points, around 112 by the end of March 2023, by the end of this financial year. But we've also got a much larger scale to deliver electric vehicle charging points, roughly at least 10% of car parking capacity. We're looking to install charging points across our top lease stations. By March 2024. So that's probably roughly 700 charging points that we're looking at the moment. Currently, as many of you would be aware, that we need to understand what the electrical capacity is at sites so that we are accommodating the right types of chargers, whether it be 7 kilowatt all the way up to 50 kilowatt across our sites where vehicles are sited. And so what we're doing at the moment, we're doing a number of feasibility studies across the regions to understand what the available capacity is, whether we need to do an upgrade, and how we can accommodate new electric vehicle charging points. And the last piece of work that we're doing as well is exploring green gas options through GPAs or other means to transition away from natural gas and other fossil fuels. Moving on to scope 2, one of the key milestones within our environmental sustainability strategy within the low emissions pillar is to purchase 100% of renewable non-traction electricity by 2020, which has already been met, and we are able to say that we are 100% renewable powered from a renewable energy guarantees of origin point of view, where we are buying renewable energy certificates from our supplier to guarantee that we are bringing or being provided with electricity that is coming from a renewable source. But the main aspect of our work within reducing our scope 2 emissions is to claim for additionality, which means that we need to start looking at how we feed in 100% renewable electricity from new built renewable energy facilities that are coming online across the country. And so we're proud to say that we have awarded our first corporate power purchase agreement to EDF Renewables, and that will deliver up to 15% of our non-traction energy from a solar farm that's being built in Norfolk. It's roughly 49.9 megawatts in size, and it will deliver power to us by the end of 2024. We're also doing a number of feasibility studies by directly connecting renewable energy such as solar arrays or wind farms into our traction network, both AC and DC systems. And that is to explore how we can utilize our land bank, but also the land bank of third parties for renewable generation. And that builds on the work that we did previously in 2019, where we installed a small solar array, which many of you may be aware of, to power the traction network in Aldershot. And many more opportunities around renewable energy and reducing our operational carbon emissions are being progressed within the regions, specifically looking at rooftop solar PV installations across our stations and our depots. So what's next within this space? So we are working with the EDF Renewables. They are currently in consultation with the local community and the council in terms of the next steps and building the renewable energy facility up to construction. But we're also looking at a much larger scale of power purchase agreements. We've got about 15% of our non-traction energy being sourced from this new Corporate Power Purchase Agreement, but we think there's a much larger size of the price that we can capture through other Corporate Power Purchase Agreements. So we're looking at that space, and we're looking to go to the market with up to 1 terawatt hour of our energy to be completely sourced from renewable power. Now, lastly, looking at how we reduce our Scope 3 emissions and infrastructure carbon, and we've got specific milestones that relate to this particular activity, which is about encouraging our supply chain to set science-based targets, and also reducing our carbon and infrastructure by the end of CP7 by 50%. So currently to date, some of the key highlights that we've been able to achieve so far is that we've been able to get 72% of our suppliers by emissions to sign up to science-based targets, which means that we expect to exceed that target that we've set ourselves by the end of 2025 to have our suppliers committed, and we expect to see with suppliers sign up to science-based target that innovations in terms of low carbon products, materials, and technologies will be embedded within capital projects and programs that we interact with suppliers on a day-to-day basis. We've also done some work to really get an understanding of what our Scope 3 emissions baseline is, so that we can target hotspots within our procurement categories, our modules, when it comes to general civils or rail, track, ballast, to understand where those carbon hotspots lie, and so that we can further encourage reductions within those particular spaces or particular modules, and also engage with the value chain and our suppliers in how to facilitate that. And one key highlight I would like to mention, especially when it comes to infrastructure carbon, is that we are introducing whole life carbon assessments, reporting, and furthermore reduction across all of our network rail capital projects. So that includes enhancements and renewals. And that's because we have, along with other arm's length bodies, we have requirements that have been set by the DfT to undertake these particular activities to further reduce carbon within our infrastructure. So we already have done some work within that space, especially with our major programs like the Transpennine Route Upgrade. That's been able to produce a carbon assessment for that particular program, and we're working with other major infrastructure programs like the Midlands Rail Hub, the Midlands Main Line Phase 3, the Euston, the redevelopment of Euston Station, and many others, so that we understand the carbon impact of those schemes, and we can start to encourage low carbon designs where possible. And so the next steps is to start or continue that activity, complete whole life carbon assessments across our capital projects, and to encourage low carbon designs and materials to be adopted. We're doing some other work in that space in terms of looking at carbon calculators, for example, to ensure that we've got the right methodology in place. We have adopted PAS 2080 as the preferred specification for network rail to adhere to, in terms of understanding what our carbon footprint is across each of the life cycle modules, from the product phase all the way through to the disposal and the decommissioning phase of an infrastructure project. And we're looking to achieve certification by the end of December 2023. So lots going into that space in terms of looking at how we achieve publicly accepted specification around carbon management, as well as aligning to specific standards such as the EN 17472 standard, which is all about how we improve and meet sustainability in construction and civil engineering. And I guess the other key aspect in terms of what our next steps will be is to encourage our remaining suppliers to set science-based targets. We've only got 3% really to target at the moment, but we certainly see a benefit in making sure that we achieve that target and that we see our suppliers adopting low carbon innovations where possible across our capital projects. So that's just, I guess, a quick synopsis in terms of our decarbonisation plans. I realise that there's many other things that I could mention around air quality and the work that we're doing around that, and specifically how we're collaborating with the RSSB in terms of monitoring air quality across 105 of our stations, and subsequent plans to audit a number of our managed stations within the business to understand that they're meeting regulations in terms of COSH, and also they've got necessary plans in place to reduce the impact of poor air quality zones that have been identified. So there's a number of key aspects that I could go into when there is questions that have been raised in the call. But yeah, other than that, that's it from me, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denzel. We have questions coming in. We have a Q&A function, so you can post your questions there. We got some. Hold on a second. I realized my microphone was up. So we have a Q&A section, and you got some applause there. So please post your questions to Q&A. I will try and bring you in to ask your question live because it's nice to see your faces. But I am looking at the chat as well. So we got a few. I'm going to go to the Q&A and maybe bring Samuel. Samuel, do you want to come in and ask your question?
Yep, good afternoon. I think you've mildly covered it, Denzel, in your later slides, but for the capital delivery enhancements and renewals baseline carbon targets, how granular will it be? So if I'm doing just an electrification project, can I look at your baseline for just electrification, or will it be kind of bundled up in a whole scheme data?
I guess is that when it comes to whole life carbon assessments, sort of
Yes.
what the scope and the boundary is around doing that for an electrification project, for
Yeah,
example.
but will that is more so? Is it could I access the data just for electrification, or will it kind of be bundled in with kind of bridge redecks and signalling works? So you can
it would be bridged in with other key works within that program. Yeah, it's a good point that you mentioned there, because we are doing a whole life carbon assessment on electrification infrastructure at the moment, but it's an enabling activity to support the business with whole life carbon assessments on particular programs that include electrification, that include other key aspects in terms of buildings, development, etc. So yes, it would be bundled into a one program, as it were.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing a baseline, because we're doing it at the moment and kind of don't know where to go. So yeah, some guidance would be great. Thank you, Denzel.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Samuel. Kiera, would you like to come in?
Hi. So we've been looking at the science-based targets, and I've been to the workshop things, but we were just wondering, do you actually have to go through the science-based targets company, or can we provide data ourselves in our own way about the carbon output and things like that?
It's a very good question. I'm not entirely sure what the process would be. I guess the only process that I'm familiar with is that if a company wants to sign up to science-based targets, then they would go through the science-based targets initiative route. So who's the company that manages that process? But yeah, I'm not entirely sure whether there's other sort of mechanisms to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we were just wondering whether we actually did need to sign up for the science-based targets or not. But if we obviously have to, then we don't have a choice to it. But we just wanted to check if there was other routes into it.
Right. Okay.
That might be, Kiera, a question to the previous speaker who delivered the, I think, or Joe. So what we're going to do, we're going to try and collect you a bit of an information, sort of an email list of people to get in touch with, and Denzel shared his email address. So maybe what you could do is just send it an email, and you, Denzel, could just ask your
Of
colleagues
course,
and
yeah, happy
kind of
to.
come back through that route. Right. Thank you very much, Kira. And Tim Danson, would you like to come in?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Denzel, thank you for that. Really good stuff. I'm just wondering, particularly in relation to what Sam was saying earlier about the whole life cost carbon assessment, where will we see that manifest itself in your standards? Is that something that's going to augment existing standards, or is that going to be something new?
So it is already within our existing standard, which is 015, which is all about environmental and social sort of information embedded within sort of capital projects. But yes, it is already part of that that standard. So it is a requirement for projects over 1 million to look at whole life carbon assessments and to identify low carbon options.
Right, sorry, I misinterpreted. I'd realised about 015. I thought this was an addition to that, but if that's what you were referring to, that's fine. Thank you.
Well, I guess just to give some more clarity, I think the DfT have also mentioned that they would like to see whole life carbon assessments done for specific tiered projects.
Yep.
So the major enhancement projects, the renewal projects, for example, which complements the work that we've done already in terms of putting that requirement into 015.
Yep.
But I guess it's just making sure that within the requirements that have been set by a DfT, that we are engaging with the relevant stakeholders across the business to make sure that requirement has been met, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's virtually the same thing.
All right. Thank you very much.
Can find my unmute button. Thank you very much. Katie Chesworth, would you like to come in, please?
Hello, yes. Hi, Denzel. Actually, I'm making a request of you, so you're not going to be so happy about this, but I'm thinking if you were willing to share the slides afterwards, that would be great. What would be really good is if we could flesh the slides out slightly with the examples you gave. So you gave some really interesting examples of the progress you're making across Network Rail, which is great to hear. But a little write-up of those that tells us a bit more about what you've done and the success you've made around carbon reduction would be really useful to hear.
Excellent. And Jamie Richardson, you have a question, and I think there's a similar question in the chat about the PAS 2080 accreditations. Lara Young has a similar question, so I don't know, maybe both of you can come in and have a question.
Thanks. Yeah. Hi, Denzel. Yeah, it was just obviously it's great Network Rail looking to go for PAS 2080 accreditation next year. Is that an expectation you'd have of the supply chain as well? I know that's something that National Highways are looking to do, to basically say we won't do work with people unless they're PAS 2080 accredited.
I think it's a good question. I think what would be, I guess the whole concept of PAS 2080 is that we are fully aligned across our supply chain in terms of carbon management. So it would be very, it'll be very it'll be much more advantageous if a supplier is looking to achieve PAS 2080 or they're moving in that direction. If we are going for that particular accreditation by in 2023. I think we still need to have that discussion in terms of, and we haven't really set that within our environmental sustainability strategy, that we expect suppliers to achieve PAS 2080. But in our journey towards getting that certification, we would expect to see a level of commitment from our suppliers, whether it be a PAS 2080 commitment or other carbon management commitment that they've set themselves. So I think in principle, yes, we would like to see something in terms of suppliers committing to carbon reduction across their infrastructure or across their particular pipeline of work. But we haven't necessarily stated that it should be PAS 2080. But I think it would be advantageous given that we are going towards that that journey.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Brilliant. And hi, it's Lara from Costain. my question probably builds on this one in relation to PAS 2080, and it was less around the rollout PAS 2080 across the supply chain. But given your ambitions from a Network Rail perspective to be PAS 2080 compliant, I think it's by 2023, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
I suppose I was just asking, what are the intentions of, so given the role that PAS 2080 outlines for a client organisation in terms of engagement, the assurance piece, etc., what are the changes we could expect to see throughout projects and contracts in terms of how Network Rail is going to potentially do more of or less of, or RIA as a whole will engage in that?
It's a good question. I think because given that we are waiting an update on PAS 2080,
Yeah.
I think it's targeted spring 23. I think there's also a specific principle which is about procurement. So there might be some information that we can build from that to understand how we are engaging with suppliers in that space. Yeah, so I guess that's probably what I would say in a sense
Okay.
of but I think one of the key things that we're doing from a procurement perspective anyway, especially within our CP7 plans, is that we are asking suppliers to set their sort of carbon reduction strategy or provide some information around carbon reduction and what they're doing in that space, so that it's part of our journey towards PAS 2080 and also meeting our targets.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's brilliant. I suppose my question was more less around the procurement aspect, which I think is great. It was that follow on through once it's,
Once
the
it's-
contract's been awarded, actually what potential changes we could see from there. But yeah, no, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you. Rupert Brennan-Brown, if you would come in, please, with your question.
Thanks, Milda. Denzel, Rupert Brennan-Brown. I'm doing some work with LARAM at the moment, who do grinders and also maintain your IM fleet. You've obviously got a lot of fleet as Network Rail, Tampers, MPVs. Infrastructure trains are mostly provided by diesel traction. And obviously, where they're quite heavy, there's a challenge on decarbonising freight infrastructure traffic anyway. But is there any, or are there any initiatives within Network Rail to address your own fleets or your suppliers' fleets, bearing in mind that both TOX and FOX are under pressure to consider decarbonisation as well?
Yes, I believe there is some initiatives. I think what we're doing especially within regions is we're looking at HVO fuel as one way as a stopgap measure, I would say, to decarbonising our fleet and the fleets of our suppliers. I guess we're still on a journey towards getting to specific technologies or fuels like hydrogen and battery, because of the disadvantages they have with providing that level of power for heavy fleet or heavy infrastructure. So one of the key things that we're also looking at is ammonia as a potential fuel. This hasn't been implemented yet, but it's still at the very early stages. So we're looking at
A bête noire
the
of
benefits
Martin
of that.
Frobisher, isn't it? This is a bête noire of Martin Frobisher, is ammonia.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so it's something that he's certainly progressing with the likes of R&D within technical authority, and the University of Birmingham, I believe, which has been involved with that particular.
And you mentioned that certain regions are leading on HVO. Do you know which those are?
Not on the top of my head. I believe possibly it could be Southern that are doing some work in that space, but I'll have to get back and confirm.
That'd be interesting, please.
Excellent. Thank you very much. James Brown, I see you have 3 questions, but there's a couple of your first questions about the business case and accounting tools. And I might be wrong, but maybe Laura has a similar tool about a question about RSSB carbon tool. So maybe if I can get you to ask that question and then Laura come in with the other one, and then I'll come back to you to your other questions later.
Yeah, of course. I separated out my questions to not hog the mic. Hi there, Denzel. James Brown from Angel Trains. Thanks very much for the presentation. I was just curious because obviously you've got a lot of projects on. I was wondering how about Network Rail goes about building the business cases around those for kind of prioritizing different projects. Do you use kind of carbon accounting, kind of price of carbon? Just if you could perhaps flesh that out and kind of where you pull those values from, that'd be interesting. Thank you.
I guess in terms of business cases for, I guess one of the key things that we're doing at the moment, and I'll probably just draw on the whole life carbon piece, is at every business case stage, it's a requirement now for us to have a carbon assessment, a whole life carbon assessment done at that stage. So specifically, Midlands Rail Hub is one example where they've just reached their outline business case stage, and they've been using the rail carbon tool to kind of get the information around what the carbon impacts are across the life cycle modules. And I guess what we have been doing is we've been using a template. We've created a template which has been shared across ALBs around how we capture the carbon impact of that. So in terms of sort of carbon accounting and carbon pricing, we're probably not there yet, but we have been exploring that in specific work streams and other areas. But the main focus at the moment has been how we incorporate whole life carbon assessments as part of a business case for our major rail infrastructure projects.
Thank you. And Laura, I realized I'm mispronouncing your name because Laura is a Lithuanian name, so that's why I'm like, if you come in with your question, thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Because I've been having some sound issues. Okay, great stuff. I like the way you say my name, actually. It's much more exotic. So I think it touches on what some of the people have just said, and actually as well what Rupert has touched on as well, because I'm from LRAM as well. I'm in the assurance team. I have done some work on trying to create our CO2 baseline so that we can move forward with our science-based targets. But the RSSB carbon tool is much more aligned with things like, for example, the embedded carbon within steel girders or concrete. That's not something that LRAM use. We need grinding stones and brake blocks and things to keep the IM fleet running and to go out and grind on the network. So our use for that tool is slightly different to perhaps other infrastructure people. I'm just wondering if there are any recommendations. I have tried, but it's the accuracy. If we're all going to make sure that we're reducing our carbon as much as possible, we need to correctly quantify it in the first place and see where that is. So I just wondered if you had any other advice, because I haven't been able to find anything.
So I think it's a very good point. I think we're certainly aware of some of the limitations of the rail carbon tool, and hence why we are putting some work together to look at, given that the rail carbon tool is going to be due an upgrade, we are putting together some of our requirements for a carbon calculator to deliver certain aspects of what we need to do. But there's also alternative tools that we've been trialing, like One-Click's LCA. And again, I'm not too sure what type of detail it'll go down into in terms of what you need, but I think that's one particular tool that that we've trialed and that's being used. We're also looking at HS2 are looking at eTool as another key tool that is a carbon calculator. But yeah, I think we're currently in the early stages of the One-Click LCA. So and as part of the work that we've done with the Shared Digital Carbon Architecture Program that's been led by DFT. So I'll be happy to share some more information around what it does and whether it can give the information that you might need for your particular piece of work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I'll bring Marta Jurado now and then Noel Dolphin afterwards, and I'll look at the questions that are in the chat after that as well.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Denzel. I just was wondering that when you say encouraging lower carbon designs and materials in projects, that might have some limitations because of the current standards. And usually when we speak with own engineers, they say, well, we cannot change this because this is as network standard says, and that might imply some different, the issues, technical issues, and safety issues. So we wonder if there is any space for innovation to bring something new. Is that something that you are looking at, or how can we leverage those kind of new designs?
It's a very good question, and I think it's certainly a topic that needs further work, because as you rightly point out, there is obviously some limitations and barriers that we understood through engagement with our RISF suppliers, that there has been limitations in terms of encouraging innovation and looking at low carbon materials and products. But I think one thing that I can draw from is the success of the work that we've done with a specific supplier on looking at low carbon coppers and trestles, and we've been able to roll that out at a competitive price to our conventional coppers and trestles across our region. So there is certainly still space to innovate, and we are looking at not just low carbon coppers and trestles as a deployment for our business to fully embed. But we're also looking at other key components like composite sleepers, for example, and other key components that can be decarbonised. So there is still room for innovation. I think we just need to, I guess, understand, as you mentioned, a variety of factors in terms of safety, the durability of the assets, maintenance, operability, buildability, all of these key aspects we need to bring together to see whether it would be viable to introduce such a product into our business.
Excellent, thank you very much, Noel. If you are ready, and then we'll go into the chat, because there's a conversation going on about heavy goods vehicle. Is it? Oh my God.
Hydrotreated vegetable oil.
HVO. There we go. So we'll go there. So Noel, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Milda. Yeah, thank you, Denzel, for the interesting presentation. I had a question on traction decarbonisation. So Network Rail, to meet the net zero by 2050 target, developed the traction decarbonisation network strategy. In the past couple of weeks, at a few conferences, Network Rail speakers have said, well, that's not funded, so a new strategy will have to be developed. Oh, God, camera slipped. But yeah, so I suppose what's the timeline for developing a new strategy that might be funded?
It's a good question. I think so. We've been working with the likes of the Great British Railways transition team, which has, I guess, taken forward the recommendations from the TDNS, noting that it wasn't a fundable program from DfT, but they've done some work to establish and model various scenarios in terms of what could be achieved, and it's part of the whole industry strategic plan, or the WISP as we know it. I believe a draft of the WISP it should be out by the end of this year. Again, I can confirm timelines, but it will certainly feed into that particular document in terms of what our plans are for traction decarbonisation. I believe there's also another key engagement with the DfT around, or given an update in terms of where we are with the TDNS and the recommendations of it, and how we're looking at a more realistic view on that, so that we understand whether it could be fundable using using a new method of calculating whether we can incorporate alternative battery and hydrogen trains. So yeah, I think I can find out when the WISP will be published, because the traction decarbonisation part of that will be published as well as that.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come now to the man who started the HVO conversation. Samuel, if you could just come in, and then maybe we'll summarize whatever is happening in the chat, because Denzel didn't have a chance to read through that.
Yeah, I think so. It was just to get a bit more information on HVO. It's something we're looking at, some electrification we're doing north of the border, and I thought I was just looking at it in an east scenario. So it's interesting to hear that it's already being trialed somewhere on the network. So it's just any, I know you're saying you might not have great amounts of information now, Denzel, but yeah, it just sounds like there's a bit of appetite for it. So not so much a question, just a comment that others are looking for it. So if there's any information you can share, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
you.
I'll take that away.
Stuart Woodsell, I'm not sure. I don't recall. I've brought you in with your question in the chat section. I have not brought
Yes.
you in before, so there you go.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. That was very good. Essentially, my question, it comes from being an infrastructure product manufacturer, if you like. So an OEM supplier. How will the carbon reduction strategy of suppliers be weighted into your supplier selection in the future? And also, it was tied up with, is there a potential conflict with the objectives of DFR, where DFR could guide you along a path of a higher carbon solution than you would otherwise arrive at?
So it's a good question. I'm not sure how it will be weighted in terms of whether when a supplier submits or shares their carbon reduction strategy. It's certainly a requirement. It's certainly something that we are scoring against. I don't know what the weighting is at the moment. Just a quick question or understanding on what DFR means.
Oh, sorry. It was designed for reliability. It was a series of workshops that we all attended in recent years, and it's a requirement of any product supplier now to demonstrate design for reliability. So that's what I'm saying, is to make a product designed for reliability, it could guide you down a different route, which could be a higher carbon impact.
Yeah, I mean, there probably will be conflicts when we're looking at other factors such as reliability, maintainability of a product compared to the higher carbon impact that it might cause. And I guess, and I think that's probably where we need to be in terms of, we shouldn't just look at the lowest carbon option of a project. We should be looking at all other aspects to give a holistic picture, so that if we are questioned on, or if suppliers question on why they haven't adopted a low carbon products, then you've got the answers behind to say, well, we've gone through that process and we selected this particular product because it met met other factors. It scored higher on other factors rather than the carbon impact itself. So
but should an innovation company at the moment be focusing on low carbon or product reliability? I know you're going to say both, but which is the priority?
I mean, I wonder whether there would be opportunities, or there's cases where there has been improved reliability and lower carbon for a product. Have there been cases where we've seen that before? So
there could be, but they could be the most expensive option then, and that brings in another question as to, if it's the most expensive but it's the lowest carbon and the most reliable, would that product be selected over something which may be cheaper in the short term, at least, and but not be so environmentally sustainable or reliable?
Yeah, and I guess that has to be evaluated on a piecemeal basis in terms of which is the most suitable approach.
Yeah,
excellent.
But that's a very clear message you need to get to the supply chain, because we need to know what we're focusing on from an innovation perspective.
Yeah, okay.
Amongst other things, of course. Yeah,
sure.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good point. Thank you very much, Stuart. James, I'm going to bring you back in. You have a choice of which of your 2 remaining questions to ask. We got 10 more minutes remaining. I think yours were the last 2 unanswered questions, so we can ask them both unless something else comes in the last 5 minutes.
No worries. We'll go for car chargers. It's great to hear that Network Rail are rolling out a lot of kind of car chargers across their sites. It's interesting when Network Rail are also, and the industry is doing lots of kind of grid reinforcement and power upgrades on the traction side. And in parallel also doing lots of grid infrastructure upgrades for the car chargers. I was just wondering whether Network Rail had looked at any projects of trying to identify synergies between the two, perhaps.
I guess across industry in terms of what's being done to install
So
car
for
charging
example,
points,
if you're having to upgrade the grid for new rolling stock at a station, kind of new traction substations, potentially also then feeding that into car chargers or vice versa, rather than kind of two separate grid upgrades to support the two different projects.
So good point. I think so. What we have done is we have looked at from a feasibility angle. We have looked at supplying charging points, electric vehicle charging points through traction connections. I think the case has been that I don't know what the economic case for it is, but for some reason it hasn't been as progressed, and we are just looking at DNO upgrades as the conventional method. But yeah, I think there is certainly opportunities to look at in terms of making sure that we're efficient, where we see that there are upgrades going in and that we are sort of picking off those upgrades to make sure that we've got car chargers in. So I guess it's a redundancy question in terms of making sure that we have available capacity if there is specific sites that are being upgraded, that we include the provision of chargers as well. But yeah, I think we probably need to look into that in a bit more detail, and sort of take some of the recommendations from that feasibility study to progress that further. But we have looked into it.
Excellent. Oh, it would be interesting to hear about more about that in future. If there's no other question, my final question was a slightly more nerdy one. Just it's interesting the kind of move of Network Rail to renewables. Arguably, Network Rail was one of the kind of first to move towards kind of zero carbon power purchasing. Kind of back in kind of 2010, I think you had your nuclear exclusive deal with EDF. And I'm just curious about that switch from kind of nuclear power supply to renewables. Is there any particular reason? Is it just the market price? Does Network Rail not consider nuclear to be a zero carbon fuel anymore? Just curious about that.
So I think there's a number of things. I mean, yes, we know that nuclear isn't zero carbon, it's low carbon, very low carbon compared to renewables. But there's also other cases in terms of we see a significant financial benefit in terms of switching to renewables, where we can hedge against market prices in terms of what we're experiencing, especially in this climate, and the use of PPAs is certainly something that could provide a significant amount of savings. And we're also meeting, claiming for additionality, where new shovel-ready projects are being built, which supports the net zero goal in terms of achieving that carbon reduction target. So yeah, I guess there's a financial element, there's a carbon reduction element about how we are transitioning from nuclear to renewables, and also there's a more of a wider scale issue where nuclear power plants are starting to shut down as well. So there's that aspect that we need to consider as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Excellent. This is your chance now to switch on your camera or just switch on your mic if I've missed the question. I think I have covered everything. I'm very curious to see what's going on in the chat, and that's why I quite like having Q&A function and the chat. And Denzel, you're missing all of that conversation. I'm sorry about it. So thank you very much. If there's no more questions, I would just like to thank you for stepping in and covering the last of the roundtables. It was really, really useful, and you had lots of questions and you answered them all. And as I mentioned it, we'll share the recording of this meeting and all the other meetings in Tech Talk next year. James got another question. I got distracted. Something about your view on carbon offsetting. Maybe I'll say my final piece and I'll leave you, Denzel, with that. So yes, the recording will be shared in Tech Talk next week, and I will send another email to all of you who attended with some contact details, so you can maybe if you have any further questions or clarifications, you can do. And Denzel then can chat with his colleagues because he cannot know everything what's going on. And so James was kind of leaving with your final thoughts on your view on carbon offsetting. Any place for it in Network Rail's plans? I'm guessing that's tree planting or any other offsetting activities.
Absolutely. I think there is certainly a case to look at carbon offsetting, especially as it tackles and supports other areas of our environmental sustainability strategy. I think we probably need to do that at a much larger scale when we look at traction decarbonisation and meeting that 27.5% reduction target, because we know that there's going to be a challenge to meet that, given that one of our colleagues mentioned about TDNS and that not being funded as yet, but we need to look at how we streamline activity, how we make it more economically viable. And when we do so, when we do look at these types of new fuels coming in for our traction network, how far would that take us down the emissions, the carbon reduction route? And if there is a shortfall, then yes, we certainly need to look at how we offset that. So yes, there's certainly a case for that. I think from a non-traction operational carbon point of view, we're really pretty much ahead of the game in a sense of we're meeting that target because of the use of PPAs, because of the use of or the reduction in energy efficient, or the reduction in carbon emissions through improved energy efficiencies, etc. So there is certainly, and the swapping out of petrol diesel vehicles to zero emission vehicles. So there is certainly some work that we're doing that are much more advanced in the operational carbon space. When it comes to scope 3 emissions, yeah, offsetting becomes much more valuable, I think, in that sense.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We are now planning our next year's member interest group schedule. And if you are interested in this topic or any other specific topics that we cover in our member interest groups, including infrastructure, rolling stock, and a variety of other themes, please do go to when you log into your RIA account, go to your account and my preferences, and you can choose which topics you're interested in, so we know then we'll reach out to you when there's the schedule out, when there's new events, we'll come to you and say, hey, register. So we'll do all that, and then you'll be in the loop. So thank you very much, and it was great to see you all. Thank you for the audience participation. It was absolutely excellent. The online event can be very sad if nobody's asking questions, but you made this work. So I hope I'll see you, lots of you, tomorrow. If not, I'll see you next time. Thank you.